Hey guys, in this section, we're going to take a look at loops in Kotlin, especially the for loops, the while, and the do while loop. Fairly straightforward. If you want to do repeated pieces of work, you would use some sort of a loop. And the first one that would normally come to your mind is a for loop. So let's use a for loop. We've already seen the for loop in the collection section. In this case, I just want to print something, let's say 5 times. So you could use I in, and then you could just give it the range here from 1 to 5 and then print ln just like that. And then when you run this, you're going to see 1 2 3 4 5. So this is the operator. Technically you could use the range to function in it, so just like range 2, and then you could have your brackets. Let's run that. It's going to give you the same result. You could also print this in reverse format, so just use a reversed function right there and it would just print everything in reverse. And if you want to convert this back to your operator, because it's easier to read in terms of readability, so we're just going to do this and put this in brackets so that it takes that as one expression and does a reverse right there. And then let's run this. It's going to give you the same result. You could also iterate in terms of step. So let's see how that happens. You could do a range and then you could do step of, let's say 2. So from 1 it counts 2, 1 2, and then it comes to 3. From there it counts to 5, comes to 2, and then comes to 5. So you could print this in reverse order as well. So you could do something like 1 in 5 down to, let's say 0. So we're going to print it till 0 and it prints 5 till 0. And if you want to have the same results as previously, you could do this. So 1 to 5. So this is the same as one operator 5 and dot reverse. So let's go back to that again, just like that, and then have another brackets and then use the reverse function just like we did previously. So this, and that's what the reverse thing is. So this is for loop. You can do a bunch of other things. You can iterate over your classic collections. So let's take a look at that. So let's create a fruits list, and that will be a list of apples and bananas. And then I will just use the in operator here. So I will use the fruit in fruits list, and let's print the fruit. Pretty much just like that. And just like the for loop, we have a while loop as well. Fairly straightforward. You will use the while keyword there, and then the way it works is you're going to use a while expression here. In this case, let's just give it like a hard-coded value as true. And then let's go and print something in here. Now notice there's something going to happen. This value is always going to be true and it's always going to print. So let's run this, and it just keeps on printing till you end up with a Stack Overflow or a memory issue, and it just keeps on printing. So I'm just going to interrupt this process. And just like that. So this happened because you did not have any break conditions inside it. So we can just do a break. I will go to break and jump expressions in just a moment. However, in this case, I'm just going to print it. So the way this would work is you're going to use a Boolean here, and that will be a var. So execute, and we're going to assign this a value of true. So while execute is equal to this. And then you're going to print hello, and then you're just going to execute make the value false, and it's the same thing that will happen. So essentially this is a kind of no point in doing this, but I just wanted to demonstrate what the while loop does. And similar to this is the do while loop, which is pretty much do while, and then you're going to put in your while expression in here. The difference between the while and the do while loop is the do while loop is going to execute at least once before it checks the condition. However, in the while loop, it is going to check the condition before it executes this piece of block. So I am going to do the same thing in here. And let's comment this. Let's remove the condition. So even though I have the value as false, it is going to execute this value, this block. So there you go. And that is the difference between the while and the do while loop. Next, let's take a look at the jump expressions. So we have 3 jump expressions in Kotlin. They are break, and then we have continue, and then we have return. So each have their own functionality. So let's take let's take a look at them. We'll create a loop here running from 1 to 10. So I in 1 to 10, and let's go ahead and print this. If I could just type. So this is just going to print 10 from 1 to 10. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in a condition here saying if I is equal to 5, we will break away from the loop. So breaking means it is just going to get away. It's going to break the loop once it sees that it is 5. It is just going to break away from this loop, and it's not going to print the rest of the elements. So let's run this. So once it sees that it was 5, and boom, it breaks there. We can also use the continue statement here. If you do continue, then what's going to happen is it's going to check if it's 5, and it's just going to skip that iteration. It's not going to execute the block for 5, and it'll go for the next iteration. That's pretty much it. So after 4, there is no 5, and it just prints 6. You could do a return. Return is going to return immediately from the method that is executing this block. So if you just do a return here, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to look at 4, and then it sees and count as 5, and then it's just going to return from this method. It's not going to execute anything that is below this method. So let's have a print statement here. Print this, and if I do this, it is just not going to print anything. Now if I use a break here, it is just going to break away from the loop. However, it's going to execute the statement right below it, just like that. And of course continue works just the same. It's just going to skip the value 5, and it's just going to print the value there. So these are break, continue, and the return jump expressions. So you could also qualify loops with labels. Let's take a look at that. In order to understand that, let's create 2 loops. One which runs for, let's say, 5 times. So 1 to 5. And let's have an inner loop as well, which will run 3 times. So we'll call it j in 1 to 3. And then we're going to print the outer value loop. So that is going to be println, and we're going to print the value of I. So if we print this, what's going to happen is it's going to run 5 times, and it's going to print each element 3 times. So it prints 1 3 times, 2 3 times, 3 3 times, and so on and so forth. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a condition here. If j is equal to 2, we are going to break. Now when we add break, what's going to happen is it's going to break from the inner loop, right? And it's going to go and print the rest of the things are going to run exactly the same. So 1. So as soon as it sees j is equal to 2, it breaks, right? And it does that for just all the values of the outer loop, right? Now I could label the loops as outer and inner. So let's do that. Outer, that's going to be like that, and then I'll name this inner, just like that. Now I could use this to break from the outer or the inner loop. So let's also print some value in here, which will be done. So I can either break from the outer or the inner loop. So if I can, if I want to break from the inner loop, which is pretty much what is happening right now, it is going to print, break from the inner loop and then print all the values of the outer loop. Now, since I have added a qualifier here, I could also break from the outer loop. And when it encounters 2, it just breaks away from the outer loop all the way, and it does not do anything for the rest of the iterations. So that is how you would use a qualifier for your loop. You could also do this with, let's also create a list of, we'll just create a list of fruits, and we will put in some apples in there, some bananas, and let's add one more, right? And then we will use the for each lambda, print ln the it predicate here. So in this case, what we are doing is for each of these elements, we are printing the values. And you could also use these as, so let's add a statement here as well, print ln, and we're going to add done here, right? So what we're going to do is we'll add a condition here saying if it, in this case the predicate dot starts with, let's say b, which is banana, we are going to return, right? So what will happen here is when this predicate, when I iterate through this list, and when I see something, when it sees something that starts with the letter b, it's still going to return. Return meaning it'll return all the way from this function, so it's not going to execute the rest of the function. So if we run this, it just prints apple, and it sees that this thing, the banana, starts with b, and it's just going to return right there. So you could also use the return from just this method local. So I could use this like return for each. So what will happen is it's just going to return from the for each loop, which is going to be local to this, local to this loop. It is going to execute this value though. So if I run this, so it sees something with bananas, and what it does is it returns, if it starts with that, it's just going to return through the local value of this for each, right? You could have this labeled as well. So I'm going to call this my label, like that. Oh, you're going to name the label like this, and you could also return from that label instead of using the implicit for each. So it does the same thing, right? So every time it sees that this thing starts with B, it returns from that loop. However, it continues with the next iteration. So that is how you would use labeling in for loops. It's quite useful when you start to use this feature, and kind of makes things really easy to implement. So play around with this.